I bought a foreclosed mountain cabin for $12,000 after my divorce. It was supposed to be my fresh start, a quiet place to rebuild my life, maybe even flip for profit. So, one cold morning, I drove up there with my contractor, Miguel, ready to see the place in person. But as we rounded the last curve, I slammed on the brakes. There were cars parked in my driveway, fresh paint on the porch, children's bicycles scattered across the yard. I stepped out, heart pounding, and before I could even knock on the door, it opened. A woman stood there, arms folded like she'd been expecting me. Mid-50s, sharp haircut, blazer instead of a jacket. Everything about her screamed authority. Behind her, I could see a living room that looked nothing like the photos I'd seen. Brand new curtains, family portraits, toys on the rug. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone dripping with polite hostility. I blinked, completely thrown. Yeah, I own this place." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "I think you're mistaken. This property belongs to the Willow Ridge Homeowners Association." I felt my jaw tighten. "I just bought at auction last month. I have the deed." For a moment, neither of us moved. The wind rustled through the pines, cold enough to sting. Behind her, a little girl peeked from the hallway, holding a stuffed rabbit. The woman finally sighed. "Well, there must be some mistake. Why don't you call your agent and sort it out? For now, please don't trespass." And then, she shut the door in my face. Miguel and I just stood there, stunned. He broke the silence first. Boss, you sure this is the right address?" I pulled out the paperwork, checked it again. The address matched perfectly. The property records, the map, everything. I tried knocking again. No answer. It didn't make sense. We circled around to the back, and that's when it hit me. This wasn't just someone squatting. This was an entire family comfortably living in my house. There was laundry hanging behind the porch, a small garden freshly planted, even a dog tied near the fence. Miguel whispered, "They've been here a while." My stomach churned. I'd expected broken windows and cobwebs, not this. That night, I drove back to town and called the county clerk's office first thing in the morning. They confirmed the deed was mine, paid in full. But when I mentioned someone was living there, the clerk hesitated. You must mean Karen," she said quietly. "She's the head of the Willow Ridge HOA. You might want to talk to her before escalating things." The name alone told me everything I needed to know. I went back up the next day, this time during daylight. As soon as I pulled up, she was already outside, standing on the porch like a sentry. "I told you yesterday, this is HOA property. You can't just show up here." I tried to keep calm. "Karen, right? Look, I don't want trouble. I bought this house fair and square. I have the documents." I handed her the deed, printed and notarized. She took one look, then smiled thinly. That's interesting," she said, flipping the paper. "Because according to our community charter, foreclosed homes within the HOA remain under association management until approved transfer, and that hasn't happened yet." "Approved by who?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "By me." I let out a slow breath. "You're saying you're the one who decides whether I can move into a house I legally own?" Karen crossed her arms. "It's not personal. We just maintain standards here. You can't expect to waltz in and disrupt our community. We have processes." Processes. I'd heard enough. I spent the next week trying to reach someone above her, county office, legal department, even the sheriff. But every road led back to the same phrase, HOA jurisdiction. It was like she'd built a web around that mountain community, and everyone was stuck in it. Meanwhile, Karen's family didn't budge. They acted like I didn't exist. Each time I drove up, I'd see them grilling on the deck, laughing, living their perfect suburban life inside my house. I started documenting everything, videos, photos, timestamps. My lawyer told me it was a case of illegal occupation, but it could take months, maybe years, to clear up through civil court. Still, I couldn't just sit and wait. One morning, I got there before sunrise. I parked a little down the road, walked up quietly, and peeked through the window. The living room lights were on. Karen was sitting at the table, flipping through papers. On the top of the stack, I could see my name, my purchase documents. That's when I realized she'd been inside the system. She wasn't confused. She was covering her tracks. When I knocked this time, she didn't flinch. Just opened the door and said, "You really don't give up, do you?" "Not when someone's living in my house," I replied. She smiled faintly. "Your house? That's funny. You haven't even passed inspection yet. Until then, it belongs to the association." "Inspection?" I repeated. "Oh, yes," she said, leaning against the doorframe. "You'll need to meet HOA standards before you're allowed full possession. Safety checks, environmental compliance, paint color approval." She ticked them off one by one. And that could take, several months. Maybe longer. I stared at her, realizing she wasn't just stalling. She was daring me to fight back. When I got back to town, I called Miguel. "We're starting renovations anyway," I told him. "Tomorrow morning." The next day, we arrived with a truck full of tools and supplies. Karen's SUV was still in the driveway. I didn't care. We unloaded everything and started working on the fence. Within 15 minutes, she was there again, clipboard in hand. "Excuse me, you can't begin exterior work without HOA authorization." I ignored her and kept hammering. She stepped closer. "This is your final warning." I turned, met her eyes, and said quietly, "Then write it down." That was the first time her smile cracked. By afternoon, we'd managed to clear most of the yard. But when I came back from a supply run the next morning, I found the entire front gate padlocked. A bright red sign hung across it. "Stop work order. HOA enforcement." I laughed in disbelief. She'd gone that far. Over the next few days, I started getting letters, fines, violation notices, threats of legal action, all from Karen, signed as HOA president. Miguel shook his head. "Boss, this lady's got it out for you." "Yeah," I said, staring at the house in the distance. "But she's not the only one who can play this game." That night, I started digging. Public records, property archives, anything tied to the HOA. It didn't take long to find something strange. A series of maintenance reimbursements paid to Karen's family over the last 3 years. Thousands of dollars each quarter, all labeled as community upkeep. But the receipts didn't match the reports. She wasn't just overstepping. She was profiting. Suddenly, everything clicked. The control, the intimidation, the fake inspections. It wasn't about keeping order. It was about keeping her scheme hidden. And now that I'd bought one of the foreclosed properties, I'd stepped right into her secret. That realization changed everything. From that moment on, I stopped being the quiet homeowner trying to avoid trouble. I became the one digging into her life, her records, her lies. And deep down, I think she knew it. Because the next morning, I found something new nailed to the front of the cabin. A letter that simply read, "Vacate immediately, or the HOA will take action." I folded it slowly, my heart steady this time. I wasn't leaving. Not until I exposed her for who she really was. The next few days were a blur of frustration and disbelief. Every phone call to the county office ended the same way. Polite apologies, vague suggestions to handle it through civil channels. Miguel kept working with me where he could, but the HOA had scared most of the crew off. Even the hardware store in town started acting strange. My orders suddenly got delayed, or lost. It was clear now. Karen had influence far beyond that neighborhood, but I wasn't the kind of man to walk away from what was mine. I decided to push back quietly. I filed every notice she sent me, took photos of every sign, every padlock, every time her car blocked the driveway. I wanted a record, a story she couldn't twist later. Still, the idea of her family sleeping in my house, eating at my table, gnawed at me like rust on metal. Miguel noticed. "You don't look so good, boss," he said one morning. "I'm fine," I lied. "Just tired of games." But inside, I was boiling. A week later, I found my chance. One of my contacts at the courthouse, a friend of a friend, told me something odd. "That HOA's been under review before," he said quietly. "There were complaints. Financial stuff. They just never went public." My heart pounded. "You mean Karen?" "Her name's all over the filings," he confirmed. She's been running that association like her own private company. If you can get proof of misuse of funds, the county will reopen the case. That was the moment I felt something shift. For the first time, I wasn't just reacting. I had leverage. I started spending my nights digging deeper. Late hours scrolling through old HOA meeting minutes, budget statements, reimbursement claims, anything I could find. Buried in one of the PDF archives, I found it. A community restoration project, approved 2 years ago, supposedly to repair the clubhouse roof. $38,000 allocated. But the receipts were for landscaping materials bought from a company called Ridgeview Supply. When I traced that business license, my stomach turned. Karen's husband was the owner. There it was. The missing link. She wasn't protecting the neighborhood. She was milking it. And every time a house went into foreclosure, the HOA managed it, siphoning off what they could before the next buyer came along. I sat back in my chair, staring at the documents on the screen. My plan was forming itself now, slow, deliberate, and very personal. The next morning, I drove back to Willow Ridge. When I reached the top of the hill, I saw Karen in her yard, pruning flowers like nothing in the world could touch her. She looked up when she heard my truck and gave me that same condescending smile. "Back again," she said. "Just checking on my property." I replied calmly. She shrugged. "You really should read the bylaws before wasting your time." "Oh, I've been reading," I said. Every line. Her expression didn't change, but I caught the flicker in her eyes, a brief flash of unease. I left without saying more. I didn't need to. Over the next week, I gathered everything. Screenshots, bank records, invoices, even photos from public property tax portals. Every piece painted the same picture. She'd been running a fraud ring under the HOA's name. But I wasn't ready to hand it over yet. Not until I knew exactly how deep it went. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the ridge, I parked near the trail that ran behind my cabin. The back porch light was on, silhouettes moving inside. I crept closer through the trees until I could hear them talking. Karen's voice was sharp and cold. "He won't last long. I've dealt with men like him before. Once the fines stack up, he'll sell and leave. They always do." Her husband chuckled. "You sure about that?" He looked stubborn. "Oh, he'll break," she said confidently. "They always do." Something in me hardened. That night, I emailed everything to my lawyer with one note. "If anything happens to me, send this to the county office immediately." I wasn't taking chances anymore. The next morning, I got an idea. If Karen thought I was beaten, she'd drop her guard. So I played along. I stopped showing up. I didn't respond to her notices. No calls, no visits. I let her think she'd won. 3 weeks passed. Then one evening, I returned quietly, no truck, no tools. Just me and a flashlight. I parked a mile down the road and hiked up through the woods until the cabin came into view. The windows glowed warmly. Laughter spilled out. Hers, her family's, living carefree in the home I owned. I watched for a while, anger burning like ice in my chest. Then I saw something move inside. Karen carrying a folder. The same blue folder I'd seen her use at HOA meetings. I pulled out my phone and zoomed in through the window. Inside the folder were documents, property transfer forms. Except the signature line wasn't blank. My name was already there. She'd forged it. My breath caught. This wasn't just harassment anymore. This was fraud. I snapped several photos, enough to make it undeniable. Then, as I stepped back, I heard something crunch behind me. A flashlight beam cut through the darkness. "Who's there?" A man's voice barked. I froze. Karen's husband. He must have been taking out the trash. I ducked low, heart pounding, and moved through the trees as quietly as I could. The beam swept past where I'd just been. I didn't breathe until I reached my truck. That night, I sent the photos to my lawyer. He called 10 minutes later, his voice tight. "This changes everything. You've got her. But if she realizes what you found, she might retaliate. Be careful." I hung up and sat there in silence, the mountain air biting cold. For the first time in months, I smiled. Because I wasn't scared anymore. I was ready. And I knew exactly how to end this. The next morning, I called a meeting with the HOA board under the pretense of resolving the ownership dispute. Karen agreed, probably expecting to gloat. I showed up early, sitting quietly as the others arrived. The board members were older, reserved people who always seemed to follow her lead. When she finally walked in, her confidence filled the room like perfume. "Well, I hope we can settle this once and for all," she said sweetly. "Oh, we will," I replied, sliding a folder across the table. "These are the financial statements from the last 3 years. I've highlighted a few payments that look unusual." She froze mid-step. The room went silent as the others began flipping through the pages. "What's this about, Karen?" one of them asked, frowning. Her smile faltered. "This is irrelevant. This isn't part of the agenda." "Actually," I said, "it's exactly the agenda." Her composure cracked for the first time. She tried to snatch the papers, but one of the board members stopped her. "We're going to review this," he said firmly. "If any of this is true, there will be consequences." Karen's face drained of color. She turned to me, voice trembling between anger and disbelief. "You think you can just come in here and destroy me?" I met her gaze. "No, Karen, you did that yourself." Without another word, I left the room. Outside, the cold air hit me like a wave of freedom. For the first time since I bought that house, I felt the weight lift off my chest. But deep down, I knew this wasn't over. Not yet, because people like Karen don't go down quietly. And the silence that followed her downfall felt too calm to be real. Karen thought she had won. She started posting notices on the gate, claiming unauthorized access and violations of HOA standards. My mailbox overflowed with papers I never signed up for, all stamped with her neat signature at the bottom. But I played along. I stayed quiet. I wanted her to believe I'd given up. I kept showing up in town, though. At the diner, the hardware store, the post office. I made sure everyone saw me. People in small towns notice things, and rumors spread faster than fire in dry pine. I didn't have to say much. Just a few casual comments, dropped in the right ears. "Funny thing," I'd say over coffee. "You know that HOA up on Willow Ridge? Turns out their budget doesn't match the books." That's all it took. Within a week, the whispers started turning into questions. People who'd lived under Karen's thumb for years began to talk about the fees that kept going up, the repairs that never happened, the clubhouse roof that somehow got fixed twice on paper but still leaked when it rained. One evening, Miguel called me. "You're making waves, boss," he said. "Karen's been at the store asking questions about you. She's nervous." "Good," I said. "Let her be." That night, I drove back up to the cabin again. I didn't even make it halfway before I saw flashing lights in the distance. A sheriff's car was parked by the driveway. My heart jumped. Had she called the cops on me again? When I got there, the deputy waved me down. "You the owner?" "Yeah," I said cautiously. He glanced back at the house. "Karen filed a trespassing complaint, but her paperwork doesn't add up. You've got the deed." I handed him a folder I'd been carrying everywhere. He flipped through it, nodded slowly, then sighed. "Thought so. Seems like she's been playing both sides. You might want to talk to the county investigator. They've been asking about her, too." The sound of that sentence hit me like a spark catching dry wood. Things were finally turning. Karen came storming out just as the deputy was leaving. "You think this is over?" she snapped, her voice trembling between anger and fear. "You don't belong here. You're ruining everything we built." I looked at her calmly. "Everything you built, Karen, was on lies, and it's about to come down." Her face went pale, but she tried to recover. "You'll regret this. You'll regret ever stepping foot on this mountain." But I wasn't scared anymore. The next few days moved like a storm. Word spread that investigators were digging into HOA accounts, and the deeper they looked, the uglier it got. Karen had funneled thousands into consulting fees, all paid to her husband's company. Contractors claimed they'd been told to overbill. Even the town treasurer admitted she'd suspected something was off for years, but didn't have proof until now. I stayed quiet through it all, watched it unfold from a distance. Every time I passed that cabin, I'd see less and less of Karen's world. The new paint started peeling. The lawn grew wild. It was like the mountain itself was taking back what belonged to it. Then, one afternoon, I got the call. It was from the county clerk's office. "Mr. Hale," the woman said, "we just wanted to inform you the HOA's board has been dissolved pending investigation. You are the legal owner of the property, with no active restrictions." I sat there in my truck for a long moment, staring at the trees swaying in the wind. It didn't feel real. But the real twist came a week later. Miguel met me at the local diner, grinning like he'd won the lottery. "You won't believe this," he said. Karen's husband flipped. He gave them everything. The fake invoices, the private account, even emails showing she forged signatures. I felt the air leave my lungs. "You're serious?" He nodded. "She's done. Facing charges." For the first time in months, I let myself breathe. When I finally returned to the cabin, it felt different. Still rough, still creaking with age, but mine again. I stepped onto the porch, ran my hand along the railing she'd painted over, and laughed quietly. The silence of the mountains felt peaceful again, not heavy. But as I opened the door, something caught my eye. An envelope sitting on the floor. No stamp, no address, just my name, written in shaky handwriting. I opened it slowly. Inside was a short note. "You may have the house, but you'll never understand what this place cost me." No signature, but I didn't need one. Karen had left her final word. I folded the letter, set it on the mantel, and looked around at the home I'd fought for. Maybe she was right. Maybe I didn't understand what it had cost her, but I knew what it had given me. A reminder that peace isn't handed to you. Sometimes, you have to take it back from the people who think they own it. And as the sun set over the ridge, I realized the truth. This wasn't just revenge. It was closure. For a long time, I thought revenge would feel like fireworks, explosive, bright, over in a flash. But when the dust settled after the HOA collapsed, it felt more like silence. Heavy, calm silence. Weeks passed. The mountain was starting to feel like mine again. Miguel and I began small repairs, replacing rotten beams, rewiring the kitchen, fixing what time had left behind. Every hammer strike echoed through the valley like punctuation at the end of a long sentence. Still, something gnawed at me. The note Karen had left. "You'll never understand what this place cost me." It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even anger. It was something else. I tried to shrug it off, but I couldn't. I wanted closure, real closure. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized I still didn't know the full story. One morning, I drove down to the county records office. I wanted to make sure there weren't any more surprises hidden in the paperwork. The clerk remembered me. She smiled awkwardly, like someone who didn't want to get too involved. "Mr. Hale," she said, pulling out a manila folder. "You might find this interesting. Public records request just came through about your property. Guess who filed it?" I didn't even have to ask. Karen. Even under investigation, she was still poking around. But when I flipped through the attached documents, my breath caught. There were old mortgage records, foreclosure filings, and a name I hadn't seen before. Martha Ellison, the original owner of the cabin. The clerk leaned in. "That's Karen's mother," she whispered. The world tilted slightly. "Her mother?" She nodded. This was her house before the foreclosure. Karen's husband handled the paperwork. Sold it off under Ridgeview's management before the HOA took control of the area. She lost it during her medical treatments. Passed away 6 months later. I just stared at the papers. My chest tightened. So that was it. That's what the note meant. Karen wasn't just power-hungry. She was protecting a ghost. The house that I'd bought, her so-called HOA treasure, had belonged to her mother. Every nail, every beam, every inch of it had history tied to her family. That realization didn't make what she'd done right, but made it make sense. When I drove back up the mountain that afternoon, the air felt heavier. The wind pushed through the trees like a whisper. For the first time, I saw the house differently. It wasn't just a property anymore. It was someone's memory, someone's loss. I thought about leaving, selling it off, letting it go. But then I remembered all the people Karen had bullied, the neighbors she'd threatened, the lives she'd twisted around her grief. I couldn't undo what happened to her mother, but I could make sure the mountain didn't become a monument to Karen's bitterness. So I stayed. Over the next few weeks, I finished the renovation myself. Miguel helped when he could, but I wanted to put my hands on everything. The paint, the floors, the wiring. I wanted to earn this place, piece by piece. One morning, as I was sanding down the banister, a car pulled up, a small tan sedan. I wiped my hands on my jeans and stepped outside. It was Karen's daughter, maybe 15 or 16. She stood there awkwardly, holding a small box. "Are you Mr. Hale?" she asked quietly. "I am." She held out the box. "My mom asked me to bring this. Said it belonged to the house." I hesitated before taking it. "How's your mom doing?" She looked down. "She's somewhere getting help. They said she won't be home for a while." I nodded. "That's probably for the best." She gave me a small, sad smile. She used to bring me up here when I was little. So my grandma planted lilacs by the porch. I thought she was lying. I never saw them. She glanced toward the steps. "You fixed it nice." "Thank you," I said softly. "Do you want to see inside?" She hesitated, then nodded. We walked through the cabin together. The creaky floors, the fireplace, the beams I'd restored. When we reached the back window, the view opened up, miles of forest, mist rolling over the ridge. She whispered. She used to sit here. Said it was the only place she could think clearly. We stood there in silence for a while. Then she set the box on the table. "Mom said this belonged here, not to her." When she left, I opened it. Inside were a few old photographs, black and white shots of the cabin decades ago. Her mother smiling on the porch, holding a toddler I guessed was Karen. Beneath them was a folded letter. It was old, fragile. The ink had faded, but I could still read the words. "If this house ever changes hands, I hope whoever finds it treats it kindly. There's peace here if you know how to listen." That line hit me hard. I looked out the window again, at the same view she must have seen. For the first time since I'd bought the place, I felt something close to peace. The next morning, I planted a row of lilac bushes along the porch, just like the ones from the photos. The air smelled of earth and new beginnings. A few days later, I got a letter in the mail from the county. Karen had officially been removed from her HOA leadership role and barred from managing any neighborhood associations for 10 years. Her husband took a plea deal. The residents voted to dissolve the HOA entirely. It was done, but the real closure came weeks later, completely unexpected. I was sitting on the porch one evening, watching the sunset, when an unfamiliar truck rolled up the drive. An older man stepped out, gray hair, thick glasses, gentle smile. "You must be Daniel," he said. "That's right," I replied. "Can I help you?" He nodded toward the cabin. "I built this place back in '78. Your name came up when I was closing some old files." I blinked. "You're the original builder?" "Yep. Worked with Martha, Karen's mother. She was something else. Said she wanted a place high enough to touch the clouds." He looked around, smiling wistfully. Glad to see it still standing. Thought it might have burned down by now. I laughed softly. Almost did, metaphorically anyway. He chuckled. "Martha used to say this mountain gives everyone what they deserve. Maybe that's still true." He tipped his hat and drove off, leaving me staring at the ridgeline, lost in thought. Maybe he was right. This mountain had tested me. Stripped away the noise, the anger, the resentment. It made me fight for peace, for belonging, for truth. And somewhere in the middle of all that chaos, it gave me something better than revenge. It gave me perspective. That night, I sat by the fireplace, staring at the flames dancing across the logs. The house creaked softly, settling into its new life. I thought about Karen, about her downfall, her grief, her pride. In some strange way, I didn't hate her anymore. I just pitied her. She'd lost everything trying to control what was never hers to own. When I finally stepped outside, the air was cool and still. The lilacs had started to bloom, faint, purple, and alive. I took a deep breath and smiled. "You were right, Martha," I murmured. "There's peace here, if you know how to listen." As I turned back toward the house, a faint sound echoed from the valley. The soft, hollow clang of a wind chime. The same one I'd heard the very first day I arrived, half buried in the porch rubble. Except this time, it didn't sound eerie. It sounded like home.